Hi guys. Okay, so we're going to be making some cutout cookies today. We're just going to be using a really simple sugar cookie recipe. Marissa's going to be my sous chef. So we're starting with 3/4 cup of butter. It's softened. So what that equals is a stick and a half. And Marissa's going to put it in our stand mixer here. If you do not have a stand mixer, you can just use a hand mixer for this part. And we're just going to mix it for a couple minutes at medium speed until it starts to get lighter in color. So what we're doing by mixing it for a while is adding air into the butter, which is going to help us have a lighter cookie. Okay, so we're going to have a couple things going on. The butter is done mixing. Marissa's going to add a cup of sugar to it, just white granulated sugar. And that's going to add sweetness to our cookie, and it's going to keep it nice and white. If we added brown sugar, it would make it chewy, and it would obviously change the color. So go ahead, Marissa, add your cup of white sugar in there. And we're going to mix that at medium speed again for for about a minute until it's nice and combined. All right, so the butter and sugar are mixing. I'm gonna get my flour measured out in my glass bowl. So I need 2.5 cups of flour, and you want to make sure that you don't pack it in. And just a little bit of salt. We actually use salted butter. The recipe calls for unsalted butter, but honestly, I always use salted butter. So I'm still gonna add salt. If you don't want to, though, and you're using salted butter, you don't have to. Oops, Marissa. Okay, so remember what I told you guys about flour is that this is going to end up being the structure of your cookie. Um, so it's going to be most of what you eat when you eat the cookie. All right, so Marissa's going to be adding a teaspoon of vanilla into the wet mixture over there. That's just going to give us a good flavor. And I have my flour, and I'm adding half a teaspoon of salt to it. So remember what salt does for baked goods. It's going to add strength to the gluten, and it's going to kind of counteract the sweetness. So I'm just stirring, I'm whisking the flour and the salt together to make sure that they're combined. All right, so we have 1 egg at room temperature. We're going to add that into our wet ingredients. And remember, eggs act as a binding agent, and they're going to add moisture and some tenderness to the baked good. So we're going to turn that on and let it mix just till it's combined. And you might need to stop and scrape down the sides of the bowl as you go. Same applies if you're using a hand mixer. If you don't have either one, a spoon will work fine. You're just going to have to work a little bit harder than we are right now. Go ahead and scrape down the sides. Okay, so we're going to be adding our flour mixture into our wet ingredients, half a cup at a time. You want to make sure that you are not over mixing. So we're going to be doing this at low speed, and then when it's combined, you're going to stop. You're going to add another half cup. Scrape down your bowl in between so that everything gets mixed together evenly. All right, lock up. Okay, so we're still adding the flour mixture in. One of the reasons why you want to make sure you don't overmix the dough is because if you do, you're going to end up with a tough cookie. You want it to be soft. I mean, obviously, you want it to be sturdy because we're going to be icing these and cutting them into shapes with our cookie cutters. But you don't want a hard cookie. That's not what we're going for here with the sugar cookies that we're making. These are all of our ingredients, though, so it's pretty low on ingredients. Fairly cheap cookie to make. And one thing that you might have noticed is that we did not add any baking soda or baking powder. So we have no leavening agent in these. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, we don't want these cookies to puff up and we don't want them to spread. So remember, baking powder makes things puff, baking soda makes things spread. We don't want either of those to happen because when we use our cookie cutters, we want the cookie to stay in that shape. So we don't want it to get out of shape by expanding and spreading, nor do we want it to have a mounded top where we're not going to be able to put the icing on and have it stay there without sliding off. So after we get done mixing all of our ingredients together, we're going to separate the dough into softball sized pieces or balls. We're going to roll them into balls and we're going to wrap them in plastic wrap and we're going to refrigerate them for at least 30 minutes. All right, so before I start forming the dough into softball size balls, I'm just going to get my plastic wrap ready just to wrap it up because you don't want it just to be sitting in the fridge without anything on it. It might soak up the scents in the fridge and that's kind of gross, especially if you have something like savory in there. So you're probably going to get about 3 balls of dough out of this. And you just want to compact it. We're not kneading it like bread or anything because you don't want to overwork it. If that happens, it's going to become tough. So you might be wondering, well, why do you even need to put it in the refrigerator? Why can't we just roll it out like this? Because it's not a really sticky dough. The reason is if you work with cold dough, it will stick less to the counter and the rolling pin. And it will also spread less when you put it in the oven. So remember what I told you guys. You don't want this, you want this to spread as little as possible. So that's what our aim is right now. Okay, so there's my ball of dough. I'm gonna stick it in the fridge and I'm gonna do the rest. And then we'll meet back up with you guys when we roll it out. Okay, so we are going to make, we're going to start making the royal icing, which is the icing that dries hard and shiny on cut out cookies. So that's what I'm going to be showing you guys how to make. We're going to start with half a cup of warm water, and then we're going to add in 6 tablespoons of meringue powder. This is an egg white substitute. So a lot of royal icing recipes are going to call for egg whites, pasteurized egg whites. This is instead, there are egg whites in here, they're dried egg whites, but they last longer this way, or the icing is going to last longer this way. So half a cup of warm water, 6 tablespoons of meringue powder, and you can buy this on Amazon, at Michael's. Sometimes they have it at the store in the baking section, but honestly, it's not very common. I also posted a link to a recipe that doesn't use meringue powder or egg whites, a royal icing recipe. You could also use buttercream icing, but that doesn't dry hard and shiny like royal icing does. Okay, so Marissa's going to whisk that together. And this actually makes quite a bit of icing, which is going to be a lot more than what we need for the amount of cookies that we make. The cookie dough that we made is going to make between 15 and 20 medium-sized cookies. And this is enough icing for like double or triple that probably. But you want to make sure you have enough, and you want to make sure you have different consistencies of icing because what you outline your cookies with is going to have to be pretty thick and it's going to have to dry fast. And then you're going to thin your icing out with some water and you're going to get what is called a flood consistency. So you're going to be able to put icing in the middle of the cookie and then what you outline the cookie with is just going to hold it in there so it's not going to run off the edges of your cookie. Okay, that's all mixed together. Okay, so we're going to put this in the bowl of our stand mixer and then we're going to add our other ingredients to it. All right, so we're gonna add, this recipe calls for 8 cups of powdered sugar. We're gonna start with less, just so we don't have a mess when the mixer starts going. Go ahead. How many are we adding? 8. So just add 6 for now, and then we'll add more as we go. That's way too much. We're gonna add a tablespoon of corn syrup. You can find this in the baking section. This one's from Aldi's. That's the cheapest place I've ever seen to buy it from. What corn syrup does for this is it helps add a little bit of moisture, and it also helps to make your shining or your icing shinier. All right, so we need a tablespoon of that and 2 teaspoons of whatever flavor you choose. So we're going to use vanilla. That's probably the most popular. But other ones that people like would be like almond. This time of year, people would like peppermint. That might be a little bit overpowering though on a cookie, so you'd have to really like it. All right, 2 teaspoons of vanilla and then a pinch of salt. Just going to help cut the sweetness. And then we're going to put it in our stand mixer. So what you're going to get from this, after we add the other 2 cups of confectioner sugar, you can put this in there, is it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be like a detailed toothpaste consistency. So this is what the consistency that you would want for outlining the cookies or adding like dots on it after the main icing has dried on there. So you want to keep some icing pretty thick in case you want to do any details in your cookie. So you might want to have a couple different bags. Go ahead, you can turn it on. Have a couple different bags of different consistencies ready to go. All right, so you should mix this for about 5 minutes, but we're going to let it mix for a little bit till all the powdered sugar gets combined, and then we're going to add our other 2 cups. And that's just going to help make sure that everything's together and it's not super hard. Okay, so what we're going to do now is first let me show you guys the consistency of this. I actually ended up having to add probably at least a fourth to a half a cup more water because it was really thick. So you can see that it's sticking to my spatula. This is like buttercream, like a normal frosting for a cake. That's what the consistency is right now. And that's what you want to start with because this is going to be your outlining and your detail consistency. So we're going to start by separating our icing into 4 different bowls because we're going to have 3 colors. We're going to have white, blue, green, and red. Okay, so the reason why we're starting with this thick icing is because we want to make sure that our detail and our flood icing have the same exact colors. So by mixing it now in there and getting the right color, then we can separate it further into these bags, these piping bags. Into these. And we can, change the consistencies before we put them in these bags. So royal icing will actually last in at room temperature in an airtight container or a Ziploc bag for up to 2 weeks. You could even freeze this. So if you froze it in an airtight container, it could last a couple months. Just make sure you thaw it to room temperature and then use either your hand mixer or your stand mixer once it gets to room temperature, just to make sure all the lumps are out of it. Okay, so Marissa's mixing up the blue. We're gonna leave one of those white, and we're using gel food coloring. So the gel is going to keep you from adding more liquid into your icing than you want. So it's going to keep the consistency. So let me show you guys the kind that we have. It's this. We got it from Amazon. But you can buy these at Michael's also. Also at the grocery store. Probably the cheapest place to buy it would honestly be Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime and you don't have to pay for shipping. So this stuff's pretty stiff. It's kind of hard to mix. But you want to make sure that you do a really good job of getting all of the colors mixed in there. Otherwise, you're going to end up with streaks through your icing. All right, so we did quite a bit of mixing. We actually had to mix a few colors to get what we wanted. It's really hard to make red icing, so we ended up using the super red, which isn't so super red, and we used a lot of that, a little bit of brown to get it darker, so it wasn't so pink, and it was okay. So to make the green, we used a lot of this leaf green color. And then we added a couple drops of royal blue, which helped get it a little bit darker green, so it's more like an evergreen rather than like a St. Patrick's Day green. Okay, so at this point, we're gonna get a couple bags and fill it with the frosting as is because we want that detail consistency. And then we're gonna seal it up so that it's airtight. And then we're just gonna set it off to the side. Like I said, you can leave it at room temperature for up to 2 weeks as long as it's airtight. Then we're going to add a little bit of water to these, just a little bit, to get a flood consistency. All right, so if you don't have pastry bags like this, then just simply a Ziploc bag will be fine. So the way I fill these up, fold the top down about an inch or two. These are smaller ones because they're for icing. And then you're just gonna put the icing right in there, close it up, twist it. So some people like to put these in a cup because then they hold their shape as you fill it. But try not to get this on the upper part of the bag. Otherwise, you'll end up with a mess. All right, so there it is. I'm going to work it down to the end, but I'm going to seal them up, and that's what I'm going to do with all of them. Okay, so we have our softball-sized sugar cookie balls, and I am going to just flatten them into a disc. And then on the table, we had 2 pieces of parchment paper. So instead of flouring the table, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just roll my dough out right between these sheets of parchment. It will keep me from having to add more flour, and it will keep from sticking to anything. So you might say, like, why don't you want to add more flour? When you add more flour, that is going to make your cookies tougher. All right, so I'm going to roll this to about 1/4 of an inch thickness because it's not going to be puffing up at all in the oven, and it's not going to be spreading too much. So you're not going to have to worry about, you're going to have to leave a little bit of space between the cookies, but not a ton. So I'm just going to put my other piece of parchment on top. If you don't have parchment, flour will work fine for this. Use my rolling pin, and I'm just going to gently roll it out. Okay, so we have our dough rolled out. We're just going to cut a couple shapes. We're going to put them on our parchment lined baking sheet. Go ahead, other side, because that's the flat side. And we can even put these in the refrigerator again once you get the shapes cut. because that will keep them from spreading further. So another like 15 minutes in the refrigerator. All right, so I'm just going to show you guys how thick that is. You can see. All right, and then they're going to go in the oven at 350 for about 10 to 12 minutes. They should be a little bit golden around the edges, darker than they are now, but you don't want them to be too brown because then that means they're going to be kind of crispy. Unless that's how you want your sugar cookies, then by all means, go ahead. So you're going to have some scraps left over after you're done cutting these, and you can form them back together into a ball and roll them out again. Flip it over. But the more that you work with the dough, the warmer it's going to get, the more it's going to spread in the oven. So I probably would not gather the scraps more than once to do that. And then I'm going to attach to this video or to this assignment a link to someone frosting their cookies with royal icing, so that you guys can see that, because if we do it, the video will just be too long. So I hope you learn how to make some sugar cookies. This is an easy recipe, so use it.